Yes, welcome. This is A RAP CRITIC special edition. I am League 16, and we back with nephew. Introduce yourself, nephew.
My name is Ramel. I'm from Harlem.
And no, we didn't get a studio apartment together. This is my nephew's old teenage bedroom, and this is, I'm sure it used to be my bedroom too. We in mama's house. We in mom's crib. And today, continuing 1996 for the rest of the year, you already know it's a very special day. This is the day where we all heard the tragic news that legend Tupac passed away. So today we're talking about the album
All Eyez On Me.
Right. All right. Y'all know how this goes. If you have not already, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. And we're going to deep dive into category 1, which is the product, the album itself. This episode, we're only going to go over the second disc in this double album, which, little background, this album was released
February 13th, 1996.
So, ironically, 7 months to the day that Tupac passed away, this album was released. Tupac doesn't get enough credit for being one of the first rap artists to release 2 albums in 1 year, right? I think maybe because he had passed away when Machiavelli was released, but make no mistake, Machiavelli, the 7-Day Theory, was going to get released in 96 either way. So, 2 albums in 1 year, dead or alive, still an amazing feat. And so this was Tupac's first major release on Death Row. This is what kind of everyone at the time was curious to see what this would be like after they heard the news that he signed to Death Row and all the rumors around it. And this was the answer after that, announcement. Okay, so Dimension 1, quality of production. So, what do you think of the production on it? First of all, who's responsible for most of the production? We said we got
Jimmy,
Johnny J,
Dr. Dre,
DJ Pooh,
DJ Bobcat, I think one.
And then Doug Rashid and the legendary Rick Rock representing some of that Bay. And as we mentioned in the West Side Connection episode, QD3. Right. So what can you say about the production on this album?
He got a very good group of producers to come and create the album with him.
Do you think any of the songs on here sound outdated?
Outdated? Like not used no more?
Like, yeah.
Probably a beat like Can't See Me.
Okay. You think that makes it sound like it's old?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like it wouldn't be used anymore.
I would say that about Holla at Me and Wonder Why. That would sound like the kind of beats that you don't hear anymore, and maybe not necessarily in the vintage, ooh, I miss that sound way. So, one thing about Tupac albums, the kind of production, the kind of samples, make you almost forget the originals because it gives these samples new life. So the Minnie Riperton sample that was made famous by a Tribe Called Quest on Check the Rhyme is given that G-Funk treatment where you almost forget that's the sample on Checkout Time. And then Run the Streets is another just interpolation. It's a pretty basic interpolation of Piece of My Love by God, but there's lots of sampling on this album. To use Winter Sadness by Kool and the Gang, a really overlooked follow-up to Summer Madness. Everybody knows Summer Madness by Kool and the Gang, but Winter Sadness, one of the hidden gems in their catalog, and turn that to Picture Me Rolling. Same way as the jazz sample that gets used for Shorty Wanna Be a Thug, and the other jazz sample that gets used for All Eyez On Me, the title track, which is the same sample that Nas used the same year for Street Dreams, which I'm sure added to their beef. But with that G-Funk feel, because 96, Death Row is still holding on to G-Funk, being that they're the ones who, were waving the flag and made G-Funk popular in the first place. Shout out to Warren G, who was the, really the leader of G-Funk, who was was not on Death Row, but down with that crew. So this is them. This is probably the last album that tries to keep it alive with that classic sound, but they're playing around, experimenting with sound. So the song that you mentioned, Can't See Me, the first song on the album, is almost so classic Dr. Dre. It's exactly the kind of Dr. Dre beat you expect. It's almost like he's like, here you go, Pac. You want a Dre beat? Here you go. One basic box Dre beat, put it in, here you go. Because it's doing all the stuff, all the, Parliament Funkadelic stuff that you heard on the Chronic. It almost sounds like Dre Day, because it's doom, 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 doom. Exactly what you expect. But then there's gems on here, like, the emergence of Johnny J as a main producer on albums, which, we can give Tupac all the credit for bringing him to the forefront. And where we're talking about disc 2 in particular. So yeah, Johnny J is bringing lots of guitars and lots of studio guitar playing over samples. So, Picture Me Rolling is not just gonna be a Kool and the Gang rip. They have someone playing the guitar and the bass line over it, and that's what people remember more than anything, is those licks and the rolling bass line on there. Can't See Me, even though it's a staple Dr. Dre beat, a stock Dr. Dre beat, it still knocks, and it's a great way to set the album off because it's energetic and it is an homage to Parliament Funkadelic, and it has George Clinton on it. So, a song like All Eyez On Me, I think the difference between the way Nas sampled it and the way it was sampled for 2pac's album is those little curls, those G-Funk curls on the ends of the sample notes give it a different texture. QD3's contribution is the softening outro of the album, Heaven Ain't Hard to Find. I'm thinking about DJ Pooh does his classic, that electro synth on When We Ride. And then you get these songs that sound pretty 90s. They kind of have some of that 90s synth R&B-ish feeling underneath them, but they work. Something to consider on the scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 2, the cohesiveness of the sonic bed. Now, Ramel, how well do all of these songs go together on this one album? It's a lot of different producers. Does it flow?
Does it flow?
The album.
Well, every song sounds different. That's number one. There's no songs that sound the same.
I do think one thing about the sequencing on this too is that the softer songs, or the songs with softer tones and less energy, are all put at the end. So where you get Run the Streets, Rather Be, Heaven Ain't Hard to Find, and then Hard to Find are there. Hard to Find being one of the harder songs squeezed in there to break it up, but the damage is done already. I think to put in the 3 songs that are intended for women at the very end, it's like, Pac, where were you trying to end us after this whole West Coast ride? Because remember, this is only the second disc of a double album, so it's a whole album. This is still the ending point. So even if we're just looking at disc 2, if you really add on disc 1, you come out with Ambitions as a Rider and end with Heaven Ain't Hard to Find, which is cool, but we already just heard Run the Streets and Rather Be Yo. So, thankfully, Ain't Hard to Find is there to break some of that up, but even that, you could argue, has softer tones and lower energy than some of the other songs like, When We Ride, Can't See Me, Picture Me Rolling. So maybe sequencing this a different way wouldn't have made it seem so bottom flimsy. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. How well does this all flow together? That takes us to dimension 3. Is there an overall mood, tone, or theme on this album?
An overall mood that all the songs are under the same mood?
Mm-hmm. Or like just the feeling on this?
There's a lot about himself in a way.
But what kind of way? Like, remember, this is Tupac fresh out of jail, and I think the celebration continues in different ways. The overall All Eyez On Me album has a tone of celebration, reveling in West Coast luxury in life and just, partying. Songs like Check Out Time and Thug Passion really emphasize that. And then the focus later on so many songs about women or geared towards women let you know that Pac is, trying to have more of an upbeat tone to things. And he's mentioned that in the interviews that he did when he was alive, how he wanted this album to be a celebration of the West Coast and just a celebration of arriving on death row. And I think, again, this too gets overlooked for continuing that with those kind of songs because you have other songs, softer songs and serious songs. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 4. Song distinction versus repetition of words and sounds. Now you said none of the beats sound like each other on this album.
Every beat is different in a way, in its own way. Like you said, some of the beats, there's the harder beats and some of them were the softer beats.
Mm-hmm. Like
some of the songs that I like, my opinion, my favorite song, Picture Me Rolling, very big beat. And then you get the classic song, classic beat, All Eyez On Me. Mm-hmm. Then you got the other beats like Can't See Me, which is supposed to, first song in the album is supposed to, jump
right
straight into it.
Okay. I agree that none of the beats really sound similar. It's enough to keep your attention throughout because you get a nice array of different sounds. Where repetition does happen on this album, because we are talking about Tupac and Tupac's style in general, is, really vulnerable to saying the same thing. Tupac has gone down in history as being one of the most repetitive rappers of all time. You are guaranteed to hear certain words repeated. What words are you going to hear repeated on Tupac songs?
Death Row a lot.
You're going to hear Outlaws.
West Coast.
You're going to hear West Coast. You're going to hear the number one word you're going to hear on Tupac songs, thug. Tupac is single-handedly responsible for making thug a word that is in our lexicon forever. You can go back and check the facts. Before the early 90s, no one was running around using the word thug unless they were kind of making fun of how other people describe criminal activity. But to be like, I'm a thug, y'all gotta give that to Tupac. But unfortunately, you're gonna hear that word tons of times on every song. You're gonna hear enemies a lot. You might hear Hennessy a lot. Come kick it. It's just a lot of repetitive sentence structure, a lot of repetitive word usage, a lot of repetitive themes. And one thing that Tupac does with his hook making is if he's not doing a hook where the singer is predominantly carrying the weight, he's probably just going to say a phrase as a refrain and repeat it. He's going to go up with it, he's going to go down with it, and that's the hook. You're not getting these intricate, 1990s hip hop hooks that almost sound like verses. A great example of that I always use is Mobb Deep, Quiet Storm. It's the realness to make you feel this. Lump them in the club, dump them out. Like that is a whole verse in itself. It's not what Tupac does. Tupac's like, shorty wanna be a thug. Shorty wanna be a thug. That's your hooks. So if you consider that to be repetitive, then that's something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 5. Ramel, how many tracks are on side 2, disc 2 of this album?
13.
Yeah, 13 tracks. So we talk about safe numbers when we go over these albums. 13 is in the safe zone. That's usually what people consider to be a good hip hop classic. We all know 10 is the magic number here for any album, but 13 is pretty safe. Now, out of 13 songs, how many songs would you say Tupac is talking about something compared to songs where he's not? Is there a good balance here?
Yes.
There's a good balance, you say.
All Eyez On Me.
You think he's talking about something on All Eyez On Me?
Himself.
I think that's standard Tupac. Let's think about songs where he's definitely talking about something. So Holla At Me is a song where he's, very in a focused manner, because Tupac is pretty regularly talking about haters and enemies. This song, he's specifically talking about friends who have betrayed him, or people who have turned their back, or people who showed a different side that he knows he can't rock with the same way, and he's calling them out, which is the holla at me. It's not like a, you know, when my homies call, kind of holla at me, like I'll be there. It's like holla at me. And this is when that phrase was just becoming a thing. You know, it started in the West Coast, and this is holla at me was like get at me then. You know, it was like a confrontational chant.
Also, rather be.
Rather be, right? He's talking about, you know, telling the woman the kind of guy that he is, if she wants to enter in a dating arrangement with him, these are the arrangements. Same thing with Run the Streets. He's like, look, if you're gonna be my girl, you gotta understand I'm gonna be running these streets, just be ready for me when I come back. Now, who's down to sign up for that? I don't know in today's society, but you know, you can check 2pac's resume, and clearly there were enough women who were down for that arrangement, right? You also have songs like Shorty Wanna Be a Thug, where he's, you know, for the entire song telling the story of a young dude who was under the influence of the hood, who was just on the wrong side of the tracks, and you know, there's this lamenting quality to it. Wonder why they call you. Some of y'all might consider this respectability politics by today's standards, but back then, this is him trying to explain the differences between women who carry themselves certain ways that are self-destructive, describing all the behaviors that this imaginary woman did, who he said, I love you like a sister, but you know, I don't approve of your ways. So it's judgment without judgment, but he's still speaking about things outside of himself. So would you say that's a good balance of content?
Also, Thug Passion too, in a way.
Thug Passion, party song. I guess it's focused on liquor. So this stuff, right? Something to consider on the scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats that takes us to Dimension 6, the features. Who we got on this album?
There's a lot of features.
All right, so name some of the people that you know off the top of your head that are on here. E40's on there. George Clinton. You got a lot of 2pac's crew.
Psych.
The Outlaws are all over here. This is actually the album where he introduces the Outlaws. And I know we've heard them on different 2pac albums, so this is not the debut of the individual rappers, because under the moniker of Dramacidal or whatever iterations of the groups, you've heard some of these rappers. But this was 2pac officially branding himself. You know, he calls himself Machiavelli. We got to give De La, since we just talked about De La, credit for, you know, always being rappers with aliases from day one, being plug 1, plug 2, plug 3, plus their other names for themselves. And then Wu-Tang really popularizing this, calling themselves, you know, AKA this, AKA this. This is 2pac's saying, all right, we got our aliases too. I'm going to be 2pac, AKA Machiavelli, after the author, the Italian writer Niccolo Machiavelli, who wrote The Prince, which is a book about ways to advance passion enemies. Machiavelli is also a writer who faked his death to avoid paying taxes. So what 2pac does with the Outlaws collective, and this is a collective of rappers he had been, you know, grooming for a while, and family and friends. So, you know, this is Gaddafi, Idi Amin, Castro, Napoleon, Mussolini, and Khomeini, and Hussein. So y'all know these people as Fatal, Young Moon, and then also Mo Preem, who is his stepbrother, and Big Psych. And he'll tell you on the end of the song, he's renaming him and rebranding him with the names of all these famous, infamous dictators throughout history. Fidel Castro, Idi Amin, Gaddafi, because that's how they wanted to present themselves, like they're taking over the game, you know. So that was the introduction there, and you'll hear them sprinkled throughout different songs. Corrupt is on Checkout Time, as we mentioned on Can't See Me. We got George Clinton. So what better way to have that staple Dr. Dre beat, which is the homage to Parliament, than having the founder of Parliament on there. Couldn't ask for a better blessing to start the second half of your album off with. Then, not just E40 as you mentioned, but we got a lot of prominent Bay Area rappers on A Hard to Find. You got Be Legit, who's also a member of the clique with E40, and you know, D-Shot gets a shout out on there, the other member of the clique, E40's brother. And you get Richie Rich on 2 tracks, which is Ain't Hard to Find and Rather Be. frequent Tupac collaborator back in those days, and Sibo, which I thought all throughout All Eyez On Me on both sides, you see Pac trying to unite Northern California and Southern California hip hop, which was something that wasn't really popular back then. And Pac, because he represented both parts of Cali, before this album he was calling Oakland his home. This is when he started claiming LA. This was him saying, I want this to be a celebration of West Coast of California, and he so did that. So now the question is, do these features help the album or do they hurt the album?
Help.
Okay, any weak features on here?
Not that I could think of.
So you like all the Outlaws rappers? You like Big Psych on there? So much trouble in the world.
They all played their part.
Okay.
You know, in my opinion, I think, you know, part of the reason why I did that is to show, you know, Death Row has a lot to offer, especially to the rap game at that time. So that's why he wanted most of the people from his label on the album instead of people from outside.
You mean his crew?
His crew.
Okay. And the singers, you know, you got Michelle, you got Joel. You also have the now infamous feature of Faith Evans' backgrounds, which they kept on Wonder Why, and this is part of what contributed to the beef, because Faith could not get clearance from Bad Boy to be on there, and then Faith later asked to be removed, so she was still paid for this feature, and I guess since they paid for it, they're like, well, we're gonna keep your background vocals, even though we have Michelle singing, and Joel, who's a frequent, you know, Death Row singer on the hooks and backgrounds of songs is on there. All right. Something to consider on the scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 7. Does the weakest or do the weakest songs on this album bring it down? Is there a weak song on this album?
Yes, there is, but in my opinion, it doesn't bring the album down.
What's the weakest song?
Heaven Ain't Hard to Find.
What makes it weak?
Soft to sound the song in a way, yeah. But it doesn't bring the album down as a whole. No.
Right. Some might feel it's a cool way to end the album because it is so soft on such a hard album, or some of y'all might feel like that takes away because it's like, why would you end such a classic album like this on a song, you know, about a woman? But, you know, it's the lighter side of Tupac. When We Ride, you know, if you're not a fan of the Outlaws, that's going to be, you know, considered a weak song. Thug Passion, Run the Streets, Wonder Why, if you're not a fan of that singing, you know, I've said on other videos that West Coast 90s songs, when they use vocals, they tend to use these auntie and uncle sounding vocals. That's another thing about Heaven Ain't Hard to Find. Danny Boy's appearance on there. If you're not into that kind of singing, that might feel like weak points for you. And the beats, I think, you know, there are up-tempo beats, there's mid-tempo beats, there's soft beats, like Ramel pointed out.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's, you know, some people consider Can't See Me a hard beat. When We Ride is a hard beat. All Eyez On Me is a hard beat. And some people consider, you know, Ain't Hard to Find a hard beat, and then Heaven Ain't Hard to Find is a soft beat. Picture Me Rolling is in the middle. So all things to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 8, Mass Appeal. This side of the album, Ramel, was this going to help the album sell? Could it appeal to a wide audience, the songs on this side?
All the songs?
Just all together, would you say, as an album, this had reach?
Yes. Especially, well, it had reach to a certain group of people.
Like who? Who you think would be the listeners of this album?
West Coast people at that time because of the beef.
Okay.
Thugs. Not
Okay.
Not thugs, but
thugs.
People that kind of live that kind of life.
Okay.
And you know, mostly some regular people because probably the environment. Like some songs that I could say are some like, you know, some songs could relate to regular people, like All Eyez On Me. Some people could be in that kind of spotlight of their life.
I think about when you said thugs, it's interesting because I think he made a lot of songs with people behind the wall in mind, people who just got out of prison. So Picture Me Rolling, you know, the talking parts do a lot for this album, where you may not get focus in some of the verses, the talking parts glue them together, like Checkout Time, where the talking, you understand that they're in a hotel and trying to get out, and that's the whole theme of that song. Picture Me Rolling, when he talks at the end and he's like, you know, shouting out all the people involved in his legal case. Shout out to the prosecutor, to the DA, to the judge. You know, it's like he wants you to get in the mind frame of somebody who's free. It's like, y'all can't touch me no more. Same thing with Wonder Why. At the end, he says, hey, see, Dolores Tucker, since you always talk about the language we use, I thought I'd use a song to explain why I use this language, talking about a certain kind of woman or whatever, right? I think an audience you left out is just people who are curious, the people who like controversy and gossip. Controversy sells just like sex sells. And so Tupac, getting out of prison, you know, like you said, you know, be in the face of this East Coast, West Coast beef. People were curious. Even if you were never a Tupac fan before, you're like, let me see what he's talking about. So
some people want to see from both sides.
Mm-hmm. And I think this album came out before the beef. Or before Hit 'Em Up at least. So people weren't all the way picking sides. So this did get a good amount of play on the East Coast. Maybe not this side, not disc 2, but you know, Tupac was still getting rotation without a lot of question. This side is not the side that has a bunch of singles, but all in all, this album charted. Was this a #1 album?
#1 album, US, on Billboard 200.
How much did it sell in its first week?
It sold 566,000.
Yeah, so it was gold in its first week, which was, you know, that's what people were aiming for back in those days, but that's still pretty impressive to go gold 7 days. That means that many people were lined up. This is back in the days of buying CDs. And as you know, in a country like America, you are not selling lots of records without appealing to every race. There's just not that many of just thugs buying CDs. So, you know, he was hitting a lot of the bases. And there's songs, plenty of songs talking to women as much as there's songs talking to men and everybody in between. But back in those days, you know, we're talking binary terms about men and women back in those days. Something to consider on the scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Now, Dimension 9, everybody's favorite, the 3 Eyes: impact, innovation, influence. The impact of this album
impacted the West Coast a lot.
It did, but it impacted the music industry, right? We're not used to self-established or already established stars going to a big label. That's like if TDE picked up J. Cole right now. It's just we're not used to that. Death Row had rose to be at the top of the game, and they took a rapper at the top of his game who had just controversy surrounding him and came on. That wasn't common in the 90s. One, he's introducing things on this side of the album. He's introducing the Drink Thug Passion. He's introducing the Outlaws. And the other thing that was introduced is double albums for rap music. We had not had double CDs for rap music, at least not in any popular fashion, not by default. We had double vinyl records for DJs and things like that, but someone releasing an album as a double. So that means if you had the tape, you had 2 tapes, and if you had the CD, you had 2 CDs. You had to open it up, flip it, 1 CD on one side, 1 CD on the other, and you know, separate booklets, I think, or 1 long booklet. So
one thing I like, especially about, you know, the label at that time and Tupac, is that they were putting out banger after banger, and they wanted everybody to succeed. Like, as you can see from the Tupac album, how he had all the Outlaws, you know, with him.
All the big Death Row artists on there, all the big... It's like they opened the budget for Pac, right? Whatever you want, Pac. Even the video, if you all remember California Love, the video, this was a part of the innovation wave too. This was I think this was a $2 million video. And legend has it, Jada Pinkett was originally supposed to direct it. She wrote the treatment. They were playing off the Mad Max classic movie imagery. George Clinton was in the video. Roger Troutman. So the 2 influential legends of creating or inspiring the West Coast G-Funk sound that this album kind of is like, waves the final flag for, are represented in the visual rollout for this album. And then at the end you have that beat by Butter, who I mentioned in the West Side Connection video, that adds to the drama. Tupac wakes up from the dream and it's like coming soon, and it's just the anticipation was built up. So everything in the marketing rollout for this album was also innovation. Again, controversy sells. The story of how he signed to Death Row, the rumors swirling around, that built anticipation for the album, and they delivered with a big budget video, a Dr. Dre produced video, the two videos, because there's a California Love remix where they doing a pool party, and you got the California Love, depending on which one you consider the remix. The Dre, you know, with the knick-knack paddywhack EPMD kind of sample is the popular one. Everybody else, but it depends. But both of them came out, money was spent, and again, double CD. This is all innovation. Now the impact of it, you said it changed the West Coast forever. How do you think it changed the West Coast?
It changed the West Coast forever because now probably wherever you go on the West Coast, you would see his face. Mm-hmm. You would, you know, some people still listen to his music out there.
The imagery, you said you liked the album cover. What did you like about the album cover?
I like the album cover, you know, because how he just signed to Death Row. He's in the picture holding up the Death Row chain, going up West Coast.
Right, that W that we keep talking about on every episode. It's just the simplest, stark imagery. It's just, it says a lot without saying anything. He's just sitting there like, what up? Y'all ready for me? And this is all a part of the rollout. The influence we know from here on out, that thug phrasing had become more popular than ever, right? You heard Mobb Deep using it, you heard Bone Thug using it, you started hearing rappers using it, but Thug started becoming synonymous with Tupac because it was just all over. A lot of people feel like there are a lot of Tupac clones that came after this era. Yeah. A lot of bandanas on heads, you know, a lot of things. A lot of
flow stealing.
So, something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to the final dimension, dimension 10. Timelessness and uniqueness. As a rap classic, does this sit in the world of music as a unique, timeless record?
Like you could play at any time.
Yeah?
Yes.
Like there's no other album like it. I would say because it's a double album, and a lot of people consider this the best executed double album, other than he whose name we won't mention on the Tupac episode. They say these are the two best double albums in rap to ever exist, and no one else should have ever tried to do it. Besides that, it was a celebratory Tupac, so it stands out in his library for sure as his most upbeat album. And with that, a celebration of Death Row right before its fall. It's like all empires crumble. This was the final Mardi Gras. You know, this was the farewell party before it all came crumbling down. So for that, but again, without nostalgia, just sonically listening to this as an album, it has a place in history as a unique classic. You don't think this sound like a bunch of other West Coast music that was out at the time?
No.
I would say maybe some of that has to do with the fact that, again, Pac took on a role of marrying the North California and the South California sounds, which no one else is really doing. You know, on the same album, getting Richie Rich, E40, and Sibo with Corrupt and, you know, other West Coast staples. It's like, oh, okay, Pac, nice. Different sounds, getting Rick Rock production and Dr. Dre production on the same album. We've never heard an album with Dr. Dre and E40 together, because just hasn't happened, so this is the one. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. A lot of people like to remember Tupac immortalized from this album. This version of Tupac, the reckless party animal. So, you know, something to think about. And with that, that is category 1 of our review from 1996, the classic album, just disc 2. There'll be a time for disc 1 in the future. In the meantime, join me and Nephew again. Y'all know what it is. A RAP CRITIC. They talk about it while I live it.
Peace.
Peace.